Phantasy Star 4 had been on my bucket list since forever. It's one of those classics my fellow nerds gush incessantly about, yet one I've kept in my backlog's back pocket till the time was right. After finishing the previous games in the series, including the travesty that is Phantasy Star Gaiden, I had to find out what all the fuss was about for myself. And well, the time was right. I finally booted up Phantasy Star 4 only to have an unexpectedly mixed reaction. First off, at the very least, Phantasy Stars 1 and 2 are must-plays to get the most out of the story. Fortunately, those games are both short enough and fun enough that there's no reason for a JRPG enthusiast to skip them. Phantasy Star 4 acts as a direct sequel to 2, set another 1,000 years in the future, and finishes off the story about as well as I could hope for. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Right off the bat, improvements abound, despite PS4 also running on the Genesis like 2 and 3 before it. Cutscenes now take on a manga-style presentation with hand-drawn panels, giving this sci-fi adventure way more personality than before. There's a talk feature reminiscent of Dragon Quest's party chat, albeit in a limited form here, aimed more at helping the player remember where to head next as opposed to providing a ton of personality. That's alright, it's still years ahead of most other JRPGs in terms of convenience. Another cool addition that stands out immediately is the variety in flavor text when investigating shelves or other objects. Rather than getting one or two generic text boxes every time, Phantasy Star 4 delivers a surprisingly large amount of bespoke flakes of added charm. Whether in describing the contents of cabinets, or bookshelves, or wardrobes you probably shouldn't be snooping through. This may sound like a silly, small thing to praise, but I can't think of any other JRPGs from the 16-bit era that put this much effort into immersion. Cute, clear sprites and large menu portraits brilliantly convey the bold, retro-futuristic character designs, the best in the series so far. On top of that, during conversations with NPCs, any of your party members might react to the dialogue purely to show more of their personality, not just to advance the plot. Another rarity for early to mid-90s JRPGs. Shout out to Raja, more on him later. Within the first few hours, a smattering of other quality-of-life features stand out. Various overworld and dungeon areas feature parallax scrolling for an added touch of realism, and there's almost always something moving on screen, yet more evidence Sega squeezed all the power they could out of the Genesis to craft this final fantastic entry. You can reorder your party and change who leads when walking around, a feature I think should be standard in all party-based RPGs. No more wasting time healing at hospitals since inns revive dead characters. Again, a standard feature for JRPGs nowadays, but props to Phantasy Star for introducing it earlier than most of the competition. Animated battle backgrounds return too, thankfully, with more sparkle and bang than ever, and in general, Phantasy Star 4 offers a noticeable, if modest, visual improvement over its predecessors. And that, dear viewer, is where I begin to feel conflicted. Growing up reading internet forums, as one child of the 90s did, I was sold on the idea that Phantasy Star 4 was the only game truly worth playing in the series, a proper classic that stands out as a shining beacon of quality among earlier titles that can't compare. Simply put, that's not the case. Look, this fourth entry introduces a ton of cool shit, but ultimately it's not that big of a leap over Phantasy Star 3 or even 2 when it comes to visuals, music, or even gameplay. Take the soundtrack, for example. Phantasy Star 4's is longer than ever, approaching 2 hours, with tons of variety and composition, but the problem lies in the Genesis's sound hardware. After playing the previous 2 games, it doesn't feel like I'm hearing anything new here, even though the tunes are different. Every song has that inescapable, tinny, warm, Genesis-y quality that fits better with simpler, shorter games. When trying to compete with the best of the SNES, the Genesis just doesn't hack it sound-wise. It's worth mentioning the compositions are as good as ever, possibly the best in the series, though I prefer both 2 and 3's more for their overall tightness and relative simplicity. PS4 serves up more of the series' signature turn-based combat where you stare at your party's behinds, barely changed from 3. Aside from struggling to remember what all the kooky spell names do, I got right into the groove of the grind, breezing through this game's well-paced battles. No more encounters every 2 steps a la Phantasy Stars 2 and 3. A key addition, however, one well ahead of its time, easily pushes this entry past the best combat in the series threshold: macros. Just like in Lunar Silver Star Harmony, check out my retrospective on that one if you're curious, you can assign up to 8 different macros or sets of actions for each party member to take, then choose a macro to automatically execute those actions for a battle turn rather than selecting commands manually. While nothing more than a pure time saver, saving time solves my biggest problem with this series and most older JRPGs. While mashing A to get through random battles is often the smartest strategy, it gets tiring. I welcome anything to speed up the process. That said, Phantasy Star 4's random encounters cede few opportunities to be so lazy. Instead, you're all but forced to make optimal use of multi-target attacks and spells, though the game is generous enough to give your mages plenty of TP for both damage and healing. PS4 puts the days of having to leave a dungeon partway through just to trek back to town and rest up firmly in the past. Bosses in particular demand the use of party buffs, a change I appreciate for bringing some strategy to the series' otherwise rote combat, but there's still not much variety to be found. Have someone use Sonair to raise agility, throw in a couple of defense buffs like Barrier, then go to town. The strat works on even the toughest enemies regardless of who's in your party, and while macros are handy, I rarely used any other than a basic everybody attack setup for much of the game. That's because, aside from wanting to conserve TP out of an overabundance of caution, your party makeup changes frequently over the adventure, forcing you to reconfigure your macros every time this happens. This being a fast-paced game and my play sessions being rather long, I often opted to choose commands the old-fashioned way instead. Speaking of which, I'm apparently so old-fashioned I didn't notice this game's got combination attacks, yet another ahead-of-its-time idea that feels undercooked. These happen automatically when you select the right spells or skills, yet I don't recall seeing a single one. Oh well, I had fun watching compilations of them on YouTube. Phantasy Star 4 offers a satisfying conclusion to the saga, despite taking place long before Phantasy Star 3. As mentioned, PS3's story, while enjoyable in its own right, doesn't play into what's going on here. Oddly, you do fight Dark Force once again in that game, despite him also being PS4's final boss, but we don't need to talk about that. 1,000 years after the heroes of Phantasy Star 2 saved the Algol system from destruction at the hands of the evil entity known as Dark Force, we follow a young hunter's apprentice, Chaz, training under a full-fledged hunter named Alice. It's unclear if she's related to the Alice from Phantasy Star 1, but it's a fun reference either way, and that's not where the tie-ins stop. Longtime fans will recognize Chaz and Alice's homeworld as Motavia, the desert planet from the first game, which got a green makeover via terraforming systems in PS2. However, these have since failed, turning the planet back into a desert. Forget character development, that's setting development, over the course of a series no less. Pretty cool. Chaz and Alice's first assignment is to deal with a monster outbreak in the basement of a local academy, after which they learn from the principal that the monsters actually came from a place called Birth Valley, where the ruins of an ancient civilization had recently been found. Scientists flouting safety for their own selfish pursuits? Say it ain't so! Worse, they encountered a mysterious villain named Zio, who warned the researchers to stay away from Birth Valley. Naturally, that's where our hunters head next, along with Han, an apprentice from the academy. Their journey takes them initially through a few small towns where they help the townsfolk in Dragon Quest-like fashion, including saving a village that was turned to stone. They also meet Rune, a mage and future full-time party member who's made it his mission to take down Zio, as well as Kariz, a native Motavian with some serious tanking capability and an even bigger bone to pick with Zio. Phantasy Star 4 changes up the way parties work once again. Now, members come and go throughout the story, with Chaz as the only constant. Near the end of the game, the party solidifies into 4 set characters, but you get to choose one more to accompany you into the final dungeons. To this day, that's a fairly uncommon way of handling parties, and it works well in keeping the combat feeling fresh, since your options change every few hours. However, the obvious choice has got to be Raja, a powerful healer you meet late in the game, who helps free up time for your other characters to cast buffs and debuffs. Raja's also just a hilarious dude. He'll constantly butt into discussions to insist the party's on the wrong track, or that their current plan won't work, or that they should really drop everything and go check out X location immediately, only to be largely ignored as an annoying C-3PO type. Of course, given he's a Desilesian who knows a lot about the Algol system's history, including the now ancient Palmadians who tie into the happenings of the plot, he's always right and acts more as a clever means of foreshadowing to the player, which I dig. Again though, he doesn't come into the picture until way later. But back to the story. Our heroes reach Birth Valley to discover it's a bioplant filled with ancient high-tech equipment. Within, they find an elf-eared girl named Rika, who explains the 1,000-year-old civilization used this plant and others like it for bioengineering. These are, in fact, the climate, soil, and ecology systems from the second game. What's more, the one at Birth Valley is still operational. Rika claims there's other such facilities around the planet, and though they're still functioning too, they're only running at a level that sustains basic existence. The party learns from an AI called Seed that the system is running beyond its control, causing the monster problem, and if left unchecked will eventually destroy the planet. They decide the best thing to do is shut down the system rather than letting it run amok. Rika joins the party and urges them to go rescue the control android named Demi, who can shut down the power supply to these systems. Unfortunately, Demi's being held by Zio, who at this point is holed up in his castle, plotting new ways to torment the citizens of the world. I won't go point by point through the rest of the plot, but it's a true world-hopping adventure, once again taking you to multiple planets, space stations, and more. Even better, fancy rocket ship travel sequences return after their depressing absence in Phantasy Star 3. Score 1 for presentation. Old nemeses from past games make their returns as well, including Lassic from the first game and yet another incarnation of Dark Force, as well as, spoiler alert, Lutz, a party member from Phantasy Star 1 who plays a key role in the lore-shaking reveals leading up to the final conflict. I won't spoil those revelations here, but know that PS4 offers a well-fleshed out and satisfying conclusion to the saga that, for once, leaves fewer questions than it answers. That is how to end a series. For the first time, side quests make an appearance in the form of hunts for the aptly named Hunters Guild on Matavia. Now, these aren't the same kind of hunts as in games like Final Fantasy 12 or 15, they're more akin to what we think of as generic side quests today, such as go to this town and speak to this person, or clear this optional dungeon. Keep in mind Phantasy Star 4 came out way back in 1993, before the concept of side quests as desirable additional content for JRPGs had solidified itself in the industry. In one respect, I give PS4 props for its forward-thinking quest design, but the implementation of this idea lacks forethought. Only one hunt is available up until just before the party leaves Matavia for story reasons. Then you'll spend a large chunk of the game, well over a third, off-planet with no real reason to revisit Matavia. Thus, most players will likely forget hunts even exist until much later in the game, at which point a slew of them unlock, turning what should have been optional side quests that break up the story beats into one long sidetrack if the player chooses to take them on. Vehicles like the Ice Digger from Phantasy Star 1 return, though they play a smaller role here, only used to reach a few new areas or near the end of the game to zip across the map like a madman. That's fine though, since they turn battles into overpowered feasts of destruction, where the party rains down hell on foes from behind the safety of ancient steel. It's like a miniature reward for all the grinding you've put in up until that point, and believe me, Phantasy Star 4 requires lots of grinding, just like the previous games. Strategy will get you far, yet not far enough to overcome the massive spikes in enemy power and levels before several of the game's key dungeons. That's par for the course for RPGs from '93 and is one reason I love these old games. But given how much praise PS4 gets today, many players might go in expecting a more modern feel. I certainly did. But no, Phantasy Star 4 offers old school JRPG goodness through and through. For those with the right expectations, it more than hits home. Thanks for watching. I've been Leon from RPG Haven. Leave a like for that algorithm, subscribe for more videos on RPGs, let me know what you thought of Phantasy Star 4 in the comments, and have a blessed day.